Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I'm your host, That One Camera Guy, and in this episode, we're going to be comparing the Canon 7D Mark II versus the Sony a6300. Let's jump into this. First of all, this review is based off of experience I had shooting high school softball and baseball. Your experience will vary depending on the lighting condition and the type of event you're going to shoot. However, I'm looking specifically at how the cameras handle the same shooting environment. At the end of the video, I'm going to give you my conclusion about which camera I would recommend if sports shooting is something you're interested in doing. And with that said, let's go ahead and jump into the comparison. Great. The first category I'm going to look at is handling and feel. This is the most subjective topic we can discuss, and very right so. Every camera not only has an emotional connection to its owner, but also how well it feels and handles in the hand. Both of these cameras are very different in build and shape. Now, when I went to shoot, I did use the small rig cage on the AUTOFOCUS to add a little more rigidity to the body, and it helped a little bit. However, it doesn't compare to the ergonomics and feel of the Canon 7D Mark II. The 7D just has all the dials and buttons nicely placed. You know where everything is, and you feel right at home. On the other hand, although the AUTOFOCUS can be customized, it feels like it takes just an extra step just to accomplish a simple task. It may not seem like much, but it's subtle enough that you could miss the shot. Raw buffer performance. Everyone shoots differently. You might spray and pray, or you might actually time the action. Needless to say, if you are a pro shooter, you definitely need to be able to take a number of frames without the camera ever lagging. The 7D Mark II is a beast. Coupled with the CF card and large buffer, I never found the 7D Mark II to ever slow down in any sporting environment I put it up against. I could fire off RAW after RAW, and I just needed to loosen up the shutter button ever so slightly to get more frames out of the camera. Unfortunately, that's not the case with the Sony a6300. Whether you're shooting in JPEG or in RAW, don't expect the buffer to give you large bursts of shots. While shooting baseball, I made sure I didn't fire too many at any given time, and it did suffice. However, those that need that burst, you'll definitely want to shoot in JPEG with the Sony a6300. Unfortunately, that might be a deal breaker for many of you. The frames per second shooting. Both cameras offer high FPS shooting. This Canon 7D Mark II tops out at 10 frames per second, while the Sony a6300 goes all the way up to 11 frames per second with that screen blackout per each frame you take. Although on paper the 11 frames per second on the Sony sounds great, in practice, for sports, it's not very usable at times. Again, if you fire too many frames, the camera will lock and you'll have to wait for the images to write to the card. It could almost feel like eternity. And at times, from my experience, if I ever ran the buffer all the way through, it would lock up for a good 10 to 20 seconds at any given time. So with regards to FPS, the 7D Mark II definitely has the advantage here. Covering autofocus. Each camera excels with its autofocusing capability. However, from my experience, I have to give the edge to the 7D Mark II to be ever so quicker for this particular sport. The camera just felt more responsive at firing frames in the Sony a6300. It doesn't mean that the a6300 had difficulty acquiring focus, but from my experience, the 7D had the slight edge. In many ways, the a6300 makes up for this for its really good face tracking, as well as 425 phase detect points. However, when it comes to simply moving a single focus point on the 6300, it feels like you gotta take so many steps just to make something so simple happen. In that regards, the slight edge goes to the 7D. Let's go over high ISO performance. First of all, typically I don't like doing comparisons like this because they're already out there and mine is not going to be the most scientific, but I did one anyway for the sake of this video. What you are going to notice is that the AUTOFOCUS edges out the 7D Mark II, from my opinion, by about a stop to almost 1.5 stops in performance. And that is a really big deal, especially if you shoot at high ISO environments a lot. When I was comparing the max ISO at 16,000 on the Canon to Sony's all the way up to 51,200, which is its extended ISO, the extended ISO on the Sony looked a lot better than Canon's native max. So that was a little bit surprising. So needless to say, if you're looking for high ISO performance, the Sony a6300 is where you want to be at. But then again, are you really going to be shooting at those extreme ISOs at sporting environments? You may or may not have to. So just keep that in mind for this. But the Sony definitely edges this one out. Let's go over lens options. I can't stress this enough, even if the a6300 was the best camera, if it didn't have native lens selection, it wouldn't matter a whole lot. Fortunately, the Sigma MC11 adapter is allowing us to bridge that gap a little better, allowing us to put some of these Sigma-based lenses onto their camera. I went ahead and tested out the Sigma 120-300 Sport on both the Canon and on Sony using the adapter. Obviously, the Canon fired off a lot faster and much quicker, but it doesn't mean that the 6300 did poorly. It was a little bit slower, but it still did really well in acquiring focus. So I don't want to discount it completely. But in terms of native lens selection, you're going to be better off with the 7D Mark II at this time. Let's go ahead and cover overheating issues. The Sony a6300 is plagued with this issue. We already know about it. I've addressed it in a prior video. But when I was shooting in a bright, hot day in the afternoon, it was probably over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature indicator came on about 20 minutes as I was shooting. Now keep in mind, I had the rig on my camera and it probably added more heat onto the camera body than it really should have had, but it did turn on and I want to let you know about that. But since I was just getting into the groove of shooting, having that indicator turn on was really frustrating. Now, since I was trading off cameras back and forth while I was testing the 7D, it wasn't a big issue. But if you're taking this camera out to shoot in an environment where it's very critical you get the shot, the last thing you want is the camera to shut down. So that is a big red flag on this camera. Please keep that in mind. And so in this case, you're not going to really see any overheating issues with the 7D. I never had any issues with that while I shot. So just please keep that in mind while you shoot. Features. The electronic viewfinder on the Sony a6300 has been a joy to use. I use it all the time now when reviewing images, and at times I'll even take the 7D Mark II and bring it up to my eye, thinking I could check for photos. And in reality, I can't. In particular, when you're shooting in bright sun, it's really difficult to evaluate the quality of the photos that you take on the back of the LCD. However, with the electronic viewfinder, I can quickly pop my eye in there and check and review my images and quality without worrying about the sun getting in the way. This can be critical in many ways when you need to check if you got the shot. So I gotta give the slight advantage to the a6300 in this case. Let's go over video. I really won't bore you with all the details and specs with video, but just be aware that the a6300 is leaps and bounds above the 7D Mark II when it comes to this category. You get 4K, 120 frames per second, you have very clean 1080p over the 7D Mark II, plus you have the ability to record and monitor through the viewfinder, the electronic viewfinder, which is really helpful in bright sunlight. It's really hard for me now to go back to a DSLR to record video because of this feature that you find in mirrorless cameras like the GH4. Yes, the a6300 is plagued with issues, rolling shutter and overheating, but if you learn to work around some of these issues, you can still get some amazing quality video out of this camera. So keep that in mind. As far as my final verdict and conclusion, if you are making a living off capturing images for sports, then my recommendation is the 7D Mark II over the Sony a6300. It's a no-brainer. Or you may want to consider something like a Nikon D500 if you use Nikon equipment. The Sony a6300, although feature-packed, still lacks some ergonomics and refinements that will make it compete at this particular level, but it is getting close. Yeah, the 7D Mark II may have some older tech inside, like its sensor and its video features, but the damn thing works. It doesn't overheat, it autofocuses when I need it to, and it just works every single time, day in, day out. If you need the shot and you gotta put food on the table, it makes a whole lot of sense to stick with your Canon or Nikon system that you have already. On the flip side, if you don't make a living doing this kind of thing and you just want to take pictures of your kids doing sporting events, then the 6300 is a very compelling camera. Not only do you still get really great image quality and fast frames per second performance, but those really nice handy video features like high frame rate recording will allow you to do some really awesome slow motion video of your kids doing sports and activities that you can put into a montage. For me personally, the video features alone on the Alpha 6300 are more than enough to tip me over in favor of the Alpha 6300, just because I use video much more frequently than I do the photography side at times. The 7D Mark II just doesn't compete at the video level, but everything else it does great. And with that said, folks, I'm gonna let the decision lie on your shoulders. I'm curious to see what you agree on, whether or not you would stick with something like the 7D Mark II or the Nikon D500 over the Alpha 6300. What do you see as the benefit and the strengths of either both sides or weaknesses that would drive you from one side or the other? Folks, I don't know everything. If you have any questions or comments about any of the gear that's featured in this video, please leave them down below. The image samples and article for this video can be found on my website at www.thatonecameraguy.com. And there you'll find information about the test and image samples from the game that I shot, and you can find them there. If you did enjoy this video, consider giving it a like, as it'll motivate me to produce more content like this. And if you do enjoy the content that I am producing and you want to see more videos like this on a weekly basis, consider subscribing. And if you missed any of my videos from the previous week, go ahead and find them around here. And with that said, I'm your host, That One Camera Guy, and I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.